Right, this is my final bit of work on the chain casting geometry. Well, this is fully modelled and animated now. You can see the side bits here are a lot flatter, and in fact, if I go over to perspective viewport, frame up, all. In fact, what I'll do to start off with is just show you what the animation looks like. That's the camera, by the way, and the camera is animated as well. So let's go to the camera and just start playing. It's starting on frame 0. Yeah, up to 780. That should be 782. Here we go. Obviously, I don't rate this type of work, which would be used for jewellery or some other forms of manufacturing, possibly. Don't know if it's possible. I don't rate it above, aerospace or rocket science or anything like that. It comes way down in terms of order of precedence of importance for stuff. But I think it's pretty cool. Also, those rings remind me of the Olympic rings. I'll show the wireframe view. Is it 4? Right, I'll try to explain what's going on. Obviously, eventually I'm going to render it out using a proper shader. So the dice will be shaded a reflective silver colour, and the rings will be shaded a reflective gold colour, and they'll have an environment ball with a 360 panorama map to it, so you'll be able to see the reflections a lot nicer on the final render once it comes out of Maya, and it'll be put together inside QuickTime, I think. We'll have to work that out afterwards, but that'll be a day for rendering. Obviously today I've just done the animation, so it's fully realised now, almost. Probably one more day for rendering, and then it'll go on the site. And then procedurally I'll try to explain what's happening. So to start off with, I do a 360 rotation of each one of the dice to show, well, a die is a singular part of the mould and dice is plural, so there's 4 dice. I think that's right, could be wrong though. And then the important thing is the order in which the dice are moved in order to free the rings from inside the mould, if it is possible, because we've been chatting with my girlfriend's dad, and he thinks that Tiffany & Co make them by hand. I don't know what he means by that, or there'll be other companies that make similar things, but on the next time round I'll try to explain things. You can see when I go into one of the orthographic views, it might be easier to see. So first is the 360 rotation, and then I turn the visibility for the top 2 dice off, bring the bottom 2 dice together and plop in the rings. Those are already free, they're just single units, and then put the top on. And then it's about the order in which you do it, because you have to open up and free the cast rings before you can open up the other part with the already preformed rings in, and then move all the dice diagonally away from each other in order to separate the mould from the rings. if it's possible. Geometrically it seems feasible. I mean, I can't help being a bit daft and thinking you could use an injection mold for bread or anything. You could make bagels linked together like this, or ice cubes. But we've also chatted about if they're slightly misaligned, you'd get streaking or just like artifacts, like errors in the shaping of the geometry for the rings. And also this thing, it's quite kind of squarish, and if it was possible to cast chains using this method, these dice would probably only be about the thickness of a pair of throwing dice for like backgammon or Monopoly or something like that in cross section, but also very long because you've got chains are quite long to fit around a neck, stuff like that. And another issue we discussed was sterling silver is very hot when you pour it. What sort of alloy could be used for the dice that would prevent the dice from melting when the silver's poured in, sterling silver, stuff like that. Perhaps it's just fun to look at the geometry and realise that this is never going to be doable, but with obviously very tiny links or chains would never be doable like this because they're going to be so small and fiddly you'd never be able to do it by hand. So each link needs to be a certain size, i.e. fairly big. Otherwise, I think the old method that everybody seems to tell me is being used of bending and fusing wire is the way forward. But I still like to think about this. Anyway, I'll show you some of the different orthographic views. Let's just see how far we are into the video. I think I just spent a few minutes chuntering on there, 7 minutes. Right, let's tab into the side. This is side, so we'll watch this for a bit. Those are the bottom two dice, and that's the placement of both rings that are already pre-formed into the mold. And this part often, I've only shared it with my girlfriend's dad so far, and it confuses him as to whether it's possible to actually get the damn things out of there. And I said it's you have to watch it very carefully to see how it'd be done, because you know, just to explain if you watch it again. So first of all, no rings are in position. The mold, this is just showing the mold, so that's not part of the process. Taking the top two away, so you only start with the bottom two, and then you plop the two rings into the top, and then you bring the top pieces in and close it up. Then you pour molten metal in there and open it up sideways, and then it's all about opening it in this dimension and then in this dimension before you move it out diagonally. Perhaps I should slow that down, but you could probably scrub the time slider to see it, possibly. Another interesting view is that's the side, so cross section, but the top is kind of interesting as well. In fact, better off in wireframe for the top view, because in a second, well, let's just start from the beginning. No rings are in there to start off with in a second. And the pieces are bought to get, this is the rotation, showing it in the perspective viewport camera. This is bringing them together, ready for the rings to be put in, which they are there. And then the top pieces are brought over and closed up. Then the pieces are poured, and you can see they fit inside, and then each one of the dice is moved in the vertical y-axis in order to free the preformed ones that are just singular rings that go into the thing, and then everything's moved apart diagonally. And when I render it out, and it's got its gold and silver shaders, I'm going to put the video in full screen mode and just have it on repeat for a bit to kind of verbalize how it looks, and the geometry is going to look a lot better at that stage. This is the front, which might be kind of interesting. Those are the bottom two dice. The rings are plopped on top. The top two dice comes into effect. Then the casting happens. Then this is probably what confuses people because of the orthographic views, because there's so much going on in this geometry. But I think eventually, once I show this fully rendered version, if you could get the project files and just play around, like, let's stop the animation. I mean, I've already pretty much showed it before. Let's see. Let's go into the top view. In fact, are the rings in position now? Yes, they are. So you can see from the top that it all fits in there, and the corner of each one of these double things here fits into the link nicely, so we can see that. So next we need to wait until it's opened up, so scrub the time slider a bit so that the casting happens there. Now those casted rings are inside there now. So back to the perspective viewport, you can see it's just about to be opened up, but those are free. And then the time slider is on 487, but watch, oops. Let me just change our perspective viewport, because the position of the camera is keyed in that perspective. But let me just frame up on this. You can see down here, once these are free in the middle, the dice move apart from each other in the vertical y-axis before they move out diagonally. So by that point you can stare down the barrel of a gun and see that the whole thing is free, and then after that they move out diagonally, and then inside you got this, which is perfectly formed rings. What I wanted to say is, obviously earlier on down the line here, let's see, just after this bit, you can see these little pegs here. That's because you're never going to be able to pour a perfect amount of metal in the top. I don't know how it'd be done. And each ring might only be 2 or 3 millimeters worth of silver, which sounds very strange. But now that that's selected, you can see later on these little pegs. Now I did consider this Tiffany & Co jewellery. I'd love to see it on how it's made, the program, how they manufacture it. But these little pegs on top, if indeed this is how they're made, you'd have to find some way of clamping each individual link, or it's basically every other. So if you've got a number of links, you could call it every odd link or every even link, but every second link in the chain, and basically clamp it and grind it off. And they've got all sorts of tools, little things with wheels that'll polish and grind and all that sort of thing. That's why there might be some artifacting, because ultimately they are handmade. If you had these dice, as we might call them, let's go back to perspective view, the camera view, these dice would have to be handled by hand as well, effectively. You wouldn't be able to have a machine do the whole thing and just pour some metal in the top. That'd be crazy. Still a handmade process, I do believe. But I mean, visiting the Tiffany & Co. Factory and seeing how they do it would help me a lot, because this might be complete hokum. But anyway, by the way, but when you're modelling in Maya, this process helps me remember the tools. You know, every so often I'll think about this geometry and do another iteration, another pass on the way it looks. Because, by the way, the original one, I'll just bring it up, Dropbox, feet are old, 3D bows, rings, and gold ringmaster, I called it. This was the original one that was rendered out in 2000, well, a long time ago. Put it full screen, play that. And I showed it to somebody, I might as well name him, Toby Izo, the guy that I know from school. He said, "Can you join the first with the last?" and started asking questions about it. Because it is kind of interesting if you scrub the time slider to see if the method is possible. So I went away and I thought, you know, think about it more. And anyway, I came up with these dice. 4 dice. It's like the 4 dice of backgammon or something. A lot of games have 4 dice. It's pretty impressive. Craps is just 2 dice. Anyway, a lot of games have dice. That's about it. I'll just let it play a couple of times more. And I'll try to keep the video relatively short, because I'm going to have to render it out and then upload it to the various web services to try and find people to, like, basically give me an opinion about it, even though it's probably incredibly boring. I'm sorry about that. And yeah, it is pretty impressive, but it doesn't compare to the engineering and thought processes that go into modelling an aerofoil for an airplane's engine, like an airfoil on the blades inside a turbine engine that allow vehicles to fly. That takes precedence over this stuff. It's far more complicated, obviously. There's a lot of computer graphics ideas, like, let's say, matrices being used. So you've got Control Z and you've got a redo function for popping matrices on and off the stack, and you build up history, which is a sequence of operations for that. So let's say I type in a value, a rotation in the x-axis of 90 degrees. Matrices are used to remap each and every single vertex in a big list in order for the rendering engine to re-render the position of the polygon mesh depending on the value that you typed into your channel box. I don't show that because I just build the geometry and see how I go, but many people show that sort of thing. When you get to that stage, you're actually interacting with DirectX if you were on a Microsoft-based product, or OpenGL if you're on, let's say, Mac or Android or many other platforms. And you're passing in objects. Actually, I'd like to record a video about Unreal Engine. It's got a container class called T-Array that's used, probably, I imagine, definitely used for all the objects in the scene that are brought in and rendered by the engine. It's all list-based, huge lists of objects, and there's a couple of features of Unreal Engine that I'd like to talk about. I spent last week looking at Unreal Engine a little bit, and this week I've gone back to Maya because over the next 20 years I want to basically work with Maya, Unreal Engine and C++ to see if I can build some features that might be useful to me or interesting to people. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but it might seem like I'm rambling on a lot here, but Maya is used for all the cutting edge movies in the industry. So from animations by Pixar, Disney, and all the big ones, Blue Sky Studios and DreamWorks, that use Maya in their pipeline to do all the modeling, shading, animation, rigging, and everything like that. And then obviously also in the industry, giants like Weta Digital, Peter Jackson's studio, build. It's composited with images from cameras. It's the movie industry, and you compositing your renders together with real camera information. But in order to create a lot of the characters in Avatar and Lord of the Rings, all the big movies, Maya is the tool that's used there. But you can also use Maya for creating assets for video games. Unreal Engine is used for laying out the environment and doing all the rules and logic for the video game and getting everything ticking over there, but every single object that's in an Unreal Engine scene will be created in an application like Maya. You can use other ones, but I choose Maya because it's so heavily used in the film industry as well, and it's probably, because it was cross-platform back in the day, it's probably going to be the platform of choice for movie and video game developers to use going forward. The Linux, Pixar apparently use Linux because I've spent a lot of time at the conferences over the years, meeting all the guys from all over the world, discussing graphics rendering technologies and how to build movies and video games and shows as well. So yeah. It's very interesting, and I'd like to spend a lot more time doing this stuff. But I'm sorry if I'm boring you now, but I think that's about it. I think I'll call it a day on this video. Right. Bye.